One of the reasons this week's episode, There's Something About Mary, resonates is because beneath all of the outrageous, gross out comedy, it's built around something that's surprisingly real. The idea of carrying a torch for someone long after life has moved on. Ted spends 13 years idealizing Mary, and while the movie turns that into an absurd romantic competition, the underlying emotion isn't fictional. Psychologists even have a name for it: lost love reunion. Research by psychologist Nancy Kalish documented hundreds of cases of former sweethearts connecting after years or even decades apart. Her studies found that when both people were unattached, these reunions often turned into lasting relationships. And stories like this are more common than you might think. Take Donna Hanover and Ed Oster. They dated as students at Stanford before Ed ended the relationship. Life took them in completely different directions. Both married other people, built families and careers, and eventually divorced. More than 30 years later, Ed called Donna out of the blue and invited her for coffee. During their walk through Central Park, one of the first things he did was apologize for making her cry all those years earlier. About a year later, they were married. Or consider Diana Biederman and Vinnie DeLongis. Diana had a huge crush on Vinnie in high school. They dated briefly before he moved away. I think that sounds a little familiar to the plot. She later admitted that despite other serious relationships, she always compared every man she met to him. Now, nearly 30 years later, Vinnie, now divorced, found her on Facebook. They agreed to spend one weekend together. Diana left the airport in tears, convinced it had been a beautiful but final reunion. Instead, they continued to see each other and eventually married. And Steve McCoy and Nancy Homray met when he was a young Marine and she was 17. They exchanged over 200 letters while he was overseas before distance finally ended the relationship. They married, raised families, and lived separate lives for decades. Social media, again, brought them together, and once the timing was finally right, they reunited, and Steve later called Nancy the one who got away. And Jim and Becky Neely followed a similar path. High school sweethearts, they drifted apart after Jimmy enlisted in the military. Nearly 50 years later, after both had lost their spouses, they found each other again. Jimmy said seeing Becky made him feel like a teenager. And perhaps the most remarkable story belongs to none other than actress Carol Channing. She reunited with her middle school boyfriend, Harry, after nearly 70 years apart. They married when Channing was 82, and she described it as rediscovering the love she lost as a child. Now, according to Nancy Kalish, first loves often become emotionally imprinted. People don't necessarily spend every day thinking about them, but the memories remain surprisingly vivid. And when life brings those people together again, sometimes through a chance encounter, sometimes through Facebook, sometimes because the timing has finally changed, that old connection can feel as though it never disappeared. And that's what There's Something About Mary exaggerates so brilliantly. Because Ted's fixation becomes a hilarious fantasy in which every man in America seems to be in love with Mary. And real life is usually much quieter. People marry, raise children, build careers, and move forward. But occasionally, they meet someone they once loved and discover those feelings never entirely left. In the end, these stories aren't really about destiny, they're about timing. Sometimes the right person arrives at the wrong moment, and every so often, life offers a second chance. So go ahead and give the subscribe button some hair gel so you never miss a thing. We enjoy bringing you content every week, and to that end, New episodes of the Real Relationships podcast drop every Thursday, so be sure to subscribe to the Real Relationships podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get podcasts so you never miss a thing. And we are also on all the socials, so be sure to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. As always, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.